So I've got 7:01, our start time 7 o'clock, and I hope other people join, but I'm not going to wait for that. I'll try and get my chat box around here and everything. But I think we can go ahead and get started. I appreciate you joining us. Ooh, Swami's coming in, so Swami's going to be a VATSIM pilot, so that's great.
Yeah, Heinz.
Hey, Swami. And so, as the title says, what we're going to talk about tonight is using VATSIM to make your PC flying more realistic and more interesting. Go to the next slide. In this presentation, David and I will try to describe the VATSIM world, how you connect the VATSIM with X-Plane, and then provide some tips for real-world pilots like us, which is our audience here, to make the most of PC flight simulation using VATSIM. And I'll just say, as a little bit of a background, as a flight instructor with primary and instrument students, it's always fun and challenging to bring people up to speed on ATC communications. We fly out of an uncontrolled field. Everybody's really good with those procedures. Then we go over to Raleigh and it becomes more of a challenge. And so I get asked by students a lot, how can I practice this when I'm not in the airplane? You know, I want to get better. I want to be better at this. And so a way that I've experienced in the past is using these flight simulator plug-in systems. The one that I've used before is a Pilot's Edge, which is a paid subscription-based service. They have paid controllers. It's West Coast based. It works very well, but they don't cover our airports and they don't cover the East Coast. And I've looked at the time that I started playing with that, and I looked at VATSIM, and I would go out on VATSIM and we'll see tools where you can see who's connected on VATSIM, and I would never see anybody flying in the United States at the times I was looking. And I go, well, this is fine, but there's nobody to talk to. Well, I didn't really understand how it works. And then when we had the stand down and I'm looking for things to do, I decided I'm going to look at this again and see if this is something that I can make work better for myself, and then maybe other club members can take advantage of it. And at that time, I put out a request. If anybody knows anything about it, please contact me. And David was kind enough to respond to that. And it turns out he knows quite a lot about it. So, and as I've learned more about it, I've begun to appreciate how useful it is in general and how useful it can be for us. So let's go to the next chart, please. And your speakers, the guy at the top is me, and I'm a CFII at Wings of Carolina, and I can't fly, so I play on the computer, and that's sad, but it's better than nothing. David Hill, I already mentioned, came to my rescue. He knows quite a lot about VATSIM. He's an instrument-rated private pilot and flies Moonies at Wings of Carolina. And what I didn't know at the time, but I've learned that he's the CEO of a company that makes simulators, including flight simulators. So David knows a lot about this stuff, and I'm really tickled that I was able to join with him to take advantage of his expertise, and we'll get to hear some of that tonight. And then last on the guest list here, I see Shane O'Neill has joined us. And Shane, your microphone is muted, so if you want to talk, you can unmute that. And Shane is the VATSIM Atlanta Center events coordinator. And when I started trying to sort out how we could use VATSIM, I reached out to some of the VATSIM organizations, and Shane was really quick to respond, very helpful, very enthusiastic. And in my experience, vast experience over the past 2 weeks playing with this stuff, the Atlanta Center group seems to be the most active. They do the best job of staffing, and my experiences in flying with them have been very good. So Shane, thank you very much for joining us.
No problem, glad to be here.
Now, Shane, I think I sent you a copy of these charts, a slide at the very end that talks about some of the rules and et cetera. And I'm going to ask you to give some color commentary on that when we get to it. Anytime that we're flipping through these slides, if I say something or something comes up and we describe it wrong or we misspeak, then put your controller voice on and please join in and very politely tell us that we're screwed up and what it's supposed to be. So hopefully, though, we've done some research and what we're saying is correct. But I appreciate you joining. So we'll have a good set of eyes here to make sure this is the straight scoop on VATSIM.
Cool.
So what is VATSIM? I already talked about it a little bit. Virtual Air Traffic Simulation Network. Virtual pilots like us to connect their flight simulators into one shared virtual world. Simulates air traffic control, which is a biggie for us. VATSIM is staffed by volunteer hobbyists. That's a difference from Pilot's Edge, et cetera, which is professional, paid people that get paid and you pay them to be there at a certain time. And because VATSIM is volunteer hobbyists, they contribute their time on a volunteer basis when it's appropriate and reasonable for them to do so. VATSIM's a big network, as I've found out. There's lots of things going on. When you click in on it, you'll see activities worldwide, Europe, Asia, here. And so to make that all work and really have people connected and cooperating at the same time, it takes rules and etiquette to make that work. And VATSIM has those kinds of things in place, and we'll talk about that tonight. The VATSIM controllers go through detailed training about ATC procedures before they're allowed to get on the network. And that's important because, these guys are amateurs, but they have been trained and they understand ATC procedures, and they're really very good. Every once in a while they make mistakes, and so do controllers in the real world. And so I like that because we make mistakes too, and we can dialogue with controllers. And I think the readiness and the technique of dialoguing with controllers in the real world is an important skill. And so I think VATSIM helps us do that quite well. Because our controllers are voluntary, the services are not consistently available. So I can't just hop on at 6 o'clock in the morning and expect to have air traffic control services for Raleigh Executive Airport. It just doesn't work that way. And so part of the trick of learning to take advantage of VATSIM is understanding how it works so you can leverage the resources when they're available in the way that they're presented. And once you figure that out, it works really well. The last bullet there is it's free. So we'll talk a little bit about this, but because it's free doesn't mean that it's there to be abused. Now, somebody pays for this under the covers, so we should always be cognizant of the fact that it's volunteer people and volunteer resources that make this stuff go. It requires a sign up. I'll provide some links at the end of the presentation, but at the starting point, there's something called vatsim.net. You go in there and you sign up. I mentioned the ATC controllers have an extensive training program that they go to before they get on the network. That's not true for pilots. And pilots can just do the plug-in, set up the software, jump on it, and start going crazy. And so please don't do that. There's nothing that prevents you from doing it until you screw up and then you disrupt the network. So one of my goals tonight is understand how to be a good citizen on VATSIM so you cooperate with everybody, everybody has fun, and you're not disruptive. We can move on to the next slide.
Okay, and I'll just add to that, Heinz, the reality is that everything you just said can be boiled down to behave just like you would if you were taking off in a real airplane out of Tango Tango Alpha. If you do that, you're going to be just fine on VATSIM. Few interesting differences with the air traffic control service model from VATSIM. Unlike the real world, you do not always have a controller staffing every position. frequently you'll just have controllers at the higher level positions, such as the center controllers. And in those cases, the idea is a top-down service model. So the controller who is available to you will provide all of his services, whatever rank he is operating as, and those services below him. So for instance, on the screenshot you see behind this slide for Washington Center, when this shot was taken, there was a controller providing services for Washington Center, but there are no tower controllers or approach controllers or ground or ATIS. They use ATIS as a control position as well. So in that case, if you were flying in the Washington, D.C. ARTC area, you would simply talk to the one guy at DC Center, and you would request each of those services that you would normally look for: your instrument clearance, your taxi clearance, your takeoff from tower, and so forth. You would just be talking to one frequency for all of those. Up here towards the northeast, you can see there was a couple of, I believe these are approach controllers that were available in that area, in addition to New York Center. So you would have had more controllers to deal with if you were at one of these airports in this area. And so it varies, is my point, as to what services you have available. I do just want to quickly slide over a map that shows you what it looks like right now in our area. So this is one of the online maps that can show you who's providing ATC on VATSIM. So for Washington Center, you can see in our area there's no lower level controllers than DC Center. Over in Charlotte, however, there are tower controllers, or a tower controller, an approach controller, and Atlanta Center controller available there. So this is the kind of variance in service availability that you have to accept with this free network. But once you get used to it, it's not bad at all. The key is discovering when are the good times to fly. And thanks to Heinz reaching out to Atlanta Center, they're going to work with us to provide time slots where we can fly with good coverage in our area, or nearby us at least. If you're on the network at a time when there are no controllers available, such as, if I bring this map back over, up here in this area where you see no colored background, there's just nobody providing ATC in that area right now. So if you were departing from an airport in that area, you would just self-announce. You would treat it like a CTAF, regardless of what airport you're on. You would use 122.8. That's the universal CTAF frequency when there are no other controllers available to provide services to you. You can fly from an uncontrolled area into controlled airspace. And when you do that, you simply reach out to the next controller that you're approaching before you get into his airspace. Let him know what you're up to, and they'll pick you up and start providing services right away. Okay, let's make sure I'm on the right slide there. So how do you determine where ATC services are available at any given time? Well, the easiest way is just to use a web-based map system. So there's the standard one that I've at least used the most is called VATtastic.com. It just simply monitors the network, and as controllers sign into their positions behind the scenes, this map will slowly build up, showing you where you have control services. You will discover that most of this happens in the evenings, which makes sense since it's all volunteer controllers. It's also the time that you have the most air traffic flying around because people are off work. So right now, for instance, would be a great time to do some flying down around Fort Lauderdale, Miami area. You have lots of ATC coverage and probably a fair amount of traffic. Up in our area, it's getting a little more populated as we speak. And certainly in the Atlanta area, as Heinz mentioned earlier, there seems to frequently be good coverage for Atlanta International and Charlotte International, which is good for us because those are close by. There's a few different types of maps. This is a newer one that's been recently released. It's called V2 Preview.Vatastic. Same information, just presented in a different way. In addition to the online maps, there are apps that you can install on your phone or your tablet that will hook into the VATSIM world and give you the same kind of data. In addition, once you're connected through your flight sim software, there's usually a way within the flight sim to have it show you who's online near you. In other words, people that are providing ATC close enough for it to be interesting for you. So the bold print at the bottom is just a reminder, since you are going to connect into this virtual world from your flight sim software, make sure that you're not showing up into the network on a runway or in mid-flight within someone's controlled airspace. It's always best to understand where you're at and what's happening in that airspace before you connect. Ideally, you just want to be on a ramp somewhere in a non-movement area, connect to the network then, and then start exploring your options for receiving those ATC services. But what I do personally, I don't only fly in the southeast area. I'll look around, and if there's nobody covering this airspace, but there's somebody out here in Texas or California, I'll frequently just move my plane over there, make up a nice route that I want to fly, and enjoy those services as well. So you do have to be flexible, I guess, is the main point to really leverage VATSIM when you happen to be available for flying yourself.
If I could interrupt for a second.
Please do, Shane.
Yeah. So in addition, it's awesome you guys are talking about this specifically. It's very important to see what kind of controllers are on before you start flying. And also something to take into account, you said something that's very interesting, is Miami's very busy tonight. And if you don't know, it's for a reason. There's an event tonight in Miami called Friday Night Ops, which I don't know if you guys talked about events yet, but if you go to that website, vatusa.net, it will show you all the events, like the events calendar essentially. So at some point, I'll start putting your guys' events on the calendar. And essentially, these events draw a lot of traffic. This one specifically, the Miami FNO, they're expecting 300 arrivals over a course of 4 hours into Miami. Obviously, because of COVID, the traffic levels have gotten insane recently. And yes, also right there on Vatastic events page. So yeah, something to take into account too is maybe don't load up a Skyhawk 172 at Miami tonight, because you might get some delays. That's it.
Awesome. Well, and I'll just throw in on top of that, why not put a Skyhawk in there? Because that's what most of us are flying in the real world. Maybe not in Miami International, but a satellite airport might be a good spot for us to do some work. Yeah. We are trying to simulate the real world as much as possible. And for us, at least for most of us, that's going to be a smaller type aircraft. But thank you for pointing that out, Shane. The events are a big part of finding busy airspace with full controllers available to you. And all of these mapping systems have a way for you to see the events going on. Also, I'll just point out, sometimes you can find it easily on the map itself. So this little flag you see right here tells you that there's some kind of an event scheduled for that airport. And you can just kind of drill into it like this to discover what that might be, see if you want to participate or not. So that is a very helpful, and it's fun. It's fun to be in busy airspace with a lot of active controllers helping manage that airspace. Okay, let's move to our next slide. This is still on me. So we're going to talk now for a few minutes about different ways that you can connect your flight sim into the VATSIM network. There are a number of third-party software products that have been developed. I don't know if any of them are directly connected or associated with the developers of VATSIM per se, or if they're just guys who did this on their own. But regardless of what flight sim software package you're running, you'll probably be able to find a client that will connect between that software and the VATSIM network. We're talking about X-Plane 11 here tonight, and there are at least two that you can use currently. One is called X Squawk Box, and the other is called X Pilot. And these two pieces of software are in various stages of constant development, and they have their own idiosyncrasies and so forth. I'm going to demonstrate X Pilot for you here this evening. I'll just give you a brief preview of what the software interface looks like. Now this component of X Pilot is running next to X-Plane 11. So it's its own standalone executable on your PC. You launch it after you've booted up X-Plane 11, and you then interact with it so as to connect to the VATSIM network. Inside X-Plane 11, you also install an add-on, a plugin they call it, and this software communicates with that plugin to deliver the information in and out of your sim. What do these clients do for you? Well, they will transmit your aircraft type and location onto the VATSIM network. That will include your airspeed, or I guess it would be your ground speed, your altitude, the aircraft type that you entered when you connected to the network, which I guess is an important point to make. The network doesn't really know what airplane you're flying in X-Plane 11. It only knows what you say about yourself when you connect. So when you choose the aircraft type code here, that's the type of airplane that the controllers are going to expect in terms of flight performance. It will also affect the way your airplane appears on the ramp, for instance, to other pilots who are near you and can see it. The model that you enter will be attempted at least to match up with a similar looking airplane. That doesn't always work out. If you're in a Cessna 172, it's always going to be pretty good, but other airplane types, for instance, the Mooney, rarely looks like a Mooney for other guys. But at least there's another airplane someone else will see, and when you're in flight, that becomes less and less significant because generally speaking, what you see is not the entire shape of the airplane, it's just the lighting system, and you'll see the moving object in the view. Anything to add on that part of it, Heinz?
No. Do we want to talk about call signs now, or are you going to save that?
We'll save that for a little bit
Okay.
later. Other than to mention, you will enter a call sign, and the call sign does have to be unique on the network at the time you connect. So if you try to enter a call sign and it's already occupied by somebody else, it won't let you connect. Just modify it slightly. But this is how you're going to identify yourself to the controllers, just like in the real world. You would say Mooney 1068 X-ray to get their attention, and this is what they're going to be seeing on their scopes to identify you. I'm not going to connect just yet. In addition to transmitting your aircraft position, speed, and so forth, these client packages also connect the audio transmissions between you and the air traffic controllers. One of the things that's a little unusual with VATSIM is that you can engage the controllers purely by textual interface. So there's a way that you can just literally type your requests down here in this little window, and they can respond. In fact, if you look on the screen right now, there's an example of that happened a little while ago at Charlotte. An American Airlines requested push and start from Charlotte Ground, and then Charlotte Ground responded with this textual reply. That's optional. You can do it that way if you choose to, but it's a far better experience if you can work with a headset and microphone. One of the cool things about the audio that they've recently improved on VATSIM is that the audio delivery system simulates distance from the transmitters as well. So as you get farther and farther away from the control tower or the receiver, whatever it is, the transmissions start getting scratchy and somewhat intermittent, and that's similar to the real world in how the audio sounds. It's quite good. A few years ago, it wasn't like that. It was always just perfect audio all the time, and if you wanted it to sound more real world, you'd have to do some stuff on your own to make that happen. So that's a nice recent improvement. Other things that the client does for you is it will deliver traffic information into your sim about nearby aircraft and you'll see them out the window. You can see them on your GPS display, the traffic page for the GTN 750. I have it down here on another window for my system. I'll just pull it up here. You will literally see the other airplanes presented just as they are in the real world on your GPS screens, if you have that aspect of it configured properly. Some of that takes a little bit of work to make perfect. And if, I guess we'll just mention right now, as you guys are trying to set your systems up, if you don't already have all this under wraps, please feel free to reach out to me or to Heinz for assistance. I know we'll both be happy to help you with it. You can also receive VATSIM weather. This, and maybe Shane can comment on this part of it. I know that in XPilot, this client that I'm currently using, it does not bring in any new weather or different weather into X-Plane 11 when I connect. It leaves the weather up to me. The X Squawk Box client that I was working with in the past did bring in VATSIM weather. As soon as I connected, like a few moments later, I would see the weather repaint, and it would be delivered up frequently, periodically from the VATSIM network. The expectation is that you're going to fly in real world weather unless you specifically let the controllers know otherwise. And Heinz is going to speak to that in a little bit as well. But Shane, do you have anything to add related to the weather experience for pilots?
Well, not really. It is good to always let the controllers know if you're not using real world weather in the simulator, because especially when it's not that big of a deal in a props, but if you're in a jet and you get a speed assignment that's like Mach 0.77 or something like that, if you guys ever flown jets in the sim, then it becomes important to have real world weather. And it also is important if you guys are doing these tight flights, like you were last time when we had to issue speed assignments and stuff. So it is important to use real world weather. That's it.
Okay, good. And so we're going to encourage you guys always to do that as well. Just have real world weather setting. However you get your weather into your X-Plane 11, from the default weather system to these add-ons, doesn't matter. But VATSIM is based on you flying in real world weather. So unless you do something special with the controller, making them aware you want to do something different, just do it that way. And then of course, these systems can also deliver flight plans. So there's a way to fill out a flight plan form and then submit that into the network. We're going to do a demonstration of that in just a little bit, so that you can get real world looking clearances and then go ahead and fly. There's a line here about the display of other airplanes and model matching. Basically what that means is when you're in the network and another airplane is sitting next to you on the ramp, the software needs some way of knowing what should that airplane look like to you. And it only knows that based on what the other person stated regarding his aircraft type. You may or may not have a graphic presentation of that aircraft type as part of your X-Plane 11 system, in which case you won't see that exact type. You're going to see something similar, probably at least a single engine airplane. Cessna 172 is a pretty good chance. I know Heinz has been flying in a, what is it, the Piper?
Twin Comanche.
Twin Comanche, and it doesn't look like a Twin Comanche to me. It looks, I think it's like a Cessna. Is it a 310 or
something like that?
Something like that.
It's a twin. Hey.
Yeah, exactly. Close enough. So don't expect perfection out of the visual representation of all the other airplanes is my main point. It only matters when you're sitting right next to them anyway, and it's cool enough just to have that guy sitting there knowing there's another person in the real world in that virtual cockpit sharing the experience with you. Okay. The identity for yourself, we already mentioned this, your aircraft type and call sign, that's provided once or when you connect. You can't change that without disconnecting from the network and coming back in. Okay, and Heinz, I think we're on to you now.
All right. And you talked, I think, pretty well covered the weather differences on VATSIM. You have some interesting things relative to scenery and airport configurations. I think those of us that are using X-Plane 11, we have fairly current and accurate scenery and airport depictions. But some flight simulators that can join the VATSIM network might not be current. So you can run into a situation where what the controller sees in terms of runways and taxiways, et cetera, might be different than what you have in your airplane. And for those of us that use ForeFlight, for instance, as part of this environment, then all that data should be pretty well correct. But if there's a difference, then you discuss it with the controller and make sure betwixt the two of you, you know who's dealing with what. That's not something in my limited experience that's been a problem so far. I'll say one thing about simulating real world conditions for flight planning, because the VATSIM world is basically using real world weather. If you want to plan your flight and come up with a flight plan and determine what you're going to file, et cetera, you can use the tools that you use in real life the same way you use them. So go to ForeFlight, put your origin, destination, look at the recommended routes, pick your routes, and populate your flight plan, and that's all based from ForeFlight on the real world weather, and that's what the VATSIM world would expect. So I think that aspect of it really helps to sync things up. And I think that's all I have on that one.
Okay. So this is me again. So let's just talk a little bit about how do you get your flight plans into the system. There's a few different ways. One possibility is you can, what they call pre-file via the vatsim.net website. So this is the vatsim.net website. This is where you'll go to create an account and get your ID so that you can log into the network in your flight sim. One of the options here for pilots is to file a flight plan. And initially on this page, it's all just descriptive information about the mechanics of filing a flight plan. Down here at the very bottom, there's a link to the page to actually do it. So here is an online form where if we wanted to, we could pre-file before I've even connected to the network, get a flight plan sent in, and then once you're in and ready to pick up your clearance, pick it up that way. This would be very similar to filing your flight plan with the real world ATC before you head out to the airport. If you want to do it that way, you certainly can. Of course, we've also mentioned that the client softwares can all do this for you. So oftentimes you'll just find yourself using that. Oh, we're going to talk about the information on the flight
typically
plan.
That's what we do, right? We'll use the flight plan form in the client, and it's very quick to do that.
You'll notice that the flight plan looks pretty similar to the, at least to the previous flight plan format for the US. The aircraft type codes, I don't know if you had wanted to mention something here, Heinz, but those are your typical /G for a WAS capable GPS.
Yeah, that's since we've moved to ICAO flight codes, of course, we have many more flight codes now that describe our aircraft's navigation equipment. But for VATSIM, GPS, WAS GPS equipped systems are /G or Golf. That's all you need to know about it.
Okay. Yeah, and if you want to fly slant U though, maybe for practice, even though you have a, technically you could put your GPS on, file that way as well and get a route that requires you to navigate VORs. To me, that's the cool thing about VATSIM, is that you can practice scenarios without spending all the money in an airplane to practice up on things such as navigation, interacting with your systems and comms. One of the things you notice in box 11A is your voice capabilities. So this is telling the controllers whether you want to interact with them over a microphone and speakers or headset or text only. Everything else should be fairly straightforward. The VATSIM ID and password, those will be assigned to you when you create your account. They'll email you your VATSIM ID and password. Those will also be entered into your third-party client software so that you can get connected onto the network. So they all have some place in here where you can provide your VATSIM ID and your VATSIM password to get on.
Hey, Swami, did you go through that process this afternoon to get your VATSIM ID?
Yeah, I got my user ID and password.
Okay,
And,
cool.
yep,
All right,
we're
so if Swami can do it, it's got to be easy.
good. Yeah.
Okay, good deal, Swami. Interesting note at the end there about ATC issued routes to expect the unexpected. And I think that's generally true in the real world as well, right? It's good to expect the unexpected. Heinz, did you have anything else that you were thinking to embellish that thought?
Yeah, here's one thing, and I think this is primarily a function of the fact that the bigger airports, and you mentioned Atlanta Hartsfield and Charlotte, are typically staffed and well staffed. Therefore, you want to fly in and out of there because it's fun. But the big airports use SIDS and stars to get in and out of them. So I found very typical that I'm getting clearances from the VATSIM controllers that have SIDS and stars, and I think that's great because most of our flying that we do for practice or IFR practice, for instance, around our airport, you just don't do those because they're not needed at our local airports for the most part. So
yeah,
that's one aspect of VATSIM that I think is a really, really good practice for us.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Okay, let's move along to our next slide. This is Heinz on this one.
Okay. The transponder use in the VATSIM world, and I can kind of simplify this chart by saying you just use your transponder like you do in the real world. So we have a transponder in your simulated aircraft. Your X-plane airplane has a transponder in there, and you set the squawk code for that transponder just like you would in the real world. For the most part, you should be squawking mode C in the bigger airports because of ADSD X, et cetera. You're supposed to be squawking mode C on the taxiways, et cetera. The use of transponder codes, 1200 for VFR, you'll get assigned transponder codes by controllers, just like is nothing different from what we do day in, day out. One thing that is different is the hijack code. Of course, we don't use that very often, but that is prohibited on VATSIM. So don't do that. If you're trying to simulate a hijacking, go somewhere else to do that. The lost comms and emergency squawk codes, pretty rare to use those on VATSIM. We'll talk a little bit more about emergencies, but if you lose communications for whatever reason, you've got your text box, you can talk to controllers, you got the VATSIM voice, so it's pretty unusual really to lose it. But if you want to use for training purposes 7600 or 7700, you should discuss that with the controller before you do it. And I think that's all I want to say there. On this next chart, using ATC communications, and this is a simple chart too. You use the same communications procedures that we use in the real world, and that's what's great about it. These controllers are trained. They use a standard air traffic control phraseology and procedures, and we, of course, will do the same, and we all know how to do it. So great chance to practice that and hear lots of examples of how that's being done. So good news is nothing new, just do what you normally do with ATC communications. David already mentioned something different about VATSIM. There's one CTAF frequency, 122.8. So if we're self-announcing at Raleigh Executive, it's not 123.075, it's 122.8. Text-based versus voice-based communications, generally text-based communications not normally used on CTAF, and I think for our purposes, unless the controllers ask you to use text-based communications with them, a lot of times they will text message you and then they will tell you to give them a voice response, but there is a capability to do it, but for the most part, just use your radios like you do in the real world. And the
I'll
last
just put out, Heinz, if they do reach out to you via a text type communication, you'll usually get some kind of flashing indicator to get your attention. Like on this client,
yeah.
It'll actually open up another tab up here with the message from the guy. Different ones do it different ways, but
yeah.
You can expect to see a fair amount of textual communications happening between other airplanes and ATC. But I think for our use, the best benefit is to just go with voice 100%.
We had on last Monday we were flying, and one of our guys had a headset. His headset ran out of battery, so he could no longer communicate via voice. And the controller said, "Hey, just switch over to text, and we'll give you your clearances that way," which they did. So, and that works fine. But voice is normally what you do. The last one, position reports. When you check in, we know how to do this. We're X miles to the south, VFR 3,500, landing Raleigh with Zulu or whatever. So normal position reports, nothing new required for VATSIM. I already alluded to this, but in general, VATSIM does not have a process to provide priority handling for traffic. Everybody is treated equally, and that includes simulated emergencies. So if you want to simulate an emergency and you expect the controllers to do something special, lots of times it's difficult for them to do it. So at a minimum, talk to the controllers before you do a simulated emergency, and then if it's not feasible to do it, then leave the network and cover that. Well, like I could see a flight instructor wanting to do this with a student. Do your emergency procedures off network is probably the simplest thing. And then the last, just reinforcement, the 7500 squawk code is not to be used.
Heinz, I'm trying to remember if we were going to do the demo connection and all that prior to this point or not.
Why don't we just do it right now?
Okay. So we just wanted to give you guys a quick taste of interacting with the VATSIM network using X-Plane 11. And I'm going to show you what the current situation is on VATtastic, the online map. So since we've been talking here this is Raleigh-Durham right here, there's now a Raleigh-Durham approach controller, and there's same guy's providing RDU ATIS right now. So a new guy has come onto his position here in addition to the Washington Center controller that's been here all along. In addition, over here in Charlotte, we still have, actually there's more there as well. So this is pretty typical in the evenings. The progression of services seems to get quite a bit better. So I just happen to have us parked over here at Charlotte. So what I'm going to do is connect onto the network, file a quick flight plan, and just receive the flight plan so you guys can hear what that's like. This is the GPS position where I'm sitting at here at Wilson Air in Charlotte. So I'm not on any active taxiway or runway area. And let's see, I'm going to bring the client software onto the screen and connect to the network. Now, after I connect, in just a moment here, we'll start seeing all of the nearby frequencies that are staffed by air traffic controllers, including those here at Charlotte.
Things are hopping tonight.
Yeah. So let's start at the lowest level, Charlotte ATIS, and pick that up. I'll just let you.
Read back, I'll hold short instructions. Bird activity vicinity airport. VFR aircraft contact clearance delivery 127.15. Advise aircraft type. Initial heading planned altitude. Advise on initial contact. You have information, Bravo.
So we won't go through, listen to all of that, but this is just like the real world, the ATIS, when there's a guy providing it, when there's an ATC guy providing ATIS services, it gets updated regularly. Information Bravo is the current one. So when you're ready to go, you're going to need to have your ATIS information just as the real world. If there is nobody providing ATIS at the airport, then you don't have to have it. You just contact the next guy up for your clearance. And if you need it, if you don't know what the real world weather is by virtue of your flight sim, you can always ask the guy for the weather or the winds, that kind of thing.
And you can also enter a .METAR
yes.
text command that gives you the VATSIM version.
That's a good point. So there's a number of these dot commands that allow you to request information off the network. So there's a textual display of the current Charlotte weather. And you'll find, generally speaking, that matches almost, if not perfectly, very, very close to what you would see on SkyVector or some other real-world weather source.
And one thing that I have heard done, and it seems to work pretty well, if the airport doesn't have active ATIS, when you contact the controller, just ask them for the runways in use, because you're going to need to know that.
Good point. Okay, so let's put together a quick flight plan here. We'll just go from Charlotte over to Tango Tango Alpha. I haven't personally found that the departure time matters. I don't know if Shane wants to jump in or not, but it doesn't seem to matter that much. I've never had anyone question it. It's up to you. Shane, do you want to?
Yeah, the only stuff that the controllers will look at is the departure and destination. Alternate on VATSIM is don't need to use that at all. Time en route, fuel available, not need. The only thing that you need is your flight type, departure, destination, cruise speed is helpful, cruise altitude, equipment suffix, and route, and your voice type. That's the only thing you need.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for us,
let me just jump in with my CFII hat here.
Yeah,
though, is don't, on this stuff and in anything that we're doing procedurally, don't cheat, don't take shortcuts. Use this as an opportunity to train and reinforce your good habits. So if you analyze the weather, you decide that an alternate is required, then plan and put an alternate in there. Similarly, worry about the times. Make that time as accurate as possible, just like you're following a flight plan in the real world. And this is just a nit, but I think just in terms of a philosophy, make this as much like the real world as possible, and you'll get the most benefit from it.
All good points. So we're just going to file this as you see here.
Before you file it, one thing, we talked about this the other day, the cruise altitude is given in thousands of feet.
Yeah.
It's not in hundreds or flight levels the way that you would normally put in a flight plan. So that's a little different.
Right. Okay, I'm going to file the plan now. This software gives you a little feedback that the flight plan got submitted. Other third-party plugins may or may not confirm that for you, although I haven't had a problem with the flight plans not going. So let's see, the next guy I would need to talk to here would be clearance delivery on 127.15. So let me get them in here. And just like the real world, we're going to listen first. And while we're sitting here, let me get this off the screen. I do just want to take a look out the cockpit. You see an airplane just took off in front of us there. That would be in the virtual world. So that's a guy like us on his sim someplace. Let me get up in here and just show you around, see if we can spot any other.
There's him departing. Yeah.
Yeah, you can see the guy on the way out there. So if we had been on frequency with the control tower at that, a minute or so ago, we would have heard his clearance to take off and so forth. There's a couple of different ways that you can light up those airplanes that are part of the network. In fact, I might need to unpause the sim here to refresh it. Yeah, there we go. So you can see the, what's it called? This is basically it's the equivalent of the IN number.
Yeah, flight number.
Flight number, yeah. These are, all these yellow guys are people on flight simulators of some sort all over the world, many of them doing flights out of Charlotte right now. So that's the world that we're in as well. And if you get in here with us in one of the club trips, you're going to see all of your buddies here from Wings of Carolina sitting on the ramp with you, getting ready to go as well. Okay, let me go ahead and call clearance delivery and see what I get. Charlotte clearance, this is Mooney 1068 X-ray, IFR to Tango Tango Alpha.
Mooney 1068 X-ray, IFR, Charlotte delivery, IFR on request, standby.
You guys all writing your craft symbols down so you can copy
I'm ready to write. we're going to grade you on your readback.
Yeah. Well, so this is the real power of it for me. I mean, that little sense of nervousness about interacting with another person out there on the radio, it's no different here from it than in the real world.
One thing while we're waiting for him to come back, on that flight plan in the remarks section, what I suggest is if we're doing a group event like our Monday night VATSIMs, in the remarks section, put your Wings of Carolina or WCFC club guide, and the controllers might be interested in that, and they might find it fun. Another thing too, while we're waiting on call signs, VATSIM is very flexible in what you use for a call sign. There are reserved call signs for supervisors, controllers, etc., that you're not supposed to use. What I recommend is when we are doing group activity on VATSIM, just use the N numbers of club airplanes or use an N number that you're familiar with. So if you just choose an N number, use that as your call sign. And if you use a club N number, when we see that N number out on VATtastic, then we'll know it's a club airplane, which is cool. But you won't have any issues with getting the wrong call sign or doing one that's inappropriate. I'll have another comment here.
Mooney 68 X-ray. Can you fly the Knights 2 departure?
68 X-ray, affirmative.
68 X-ray. Have your clearance advisor ready to copy.
So you can see this guy's a little newer, perhaps, than some that we've had, but this is not, let's just.
But he's giving you a SID. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
68 X-ray, ready to copy.
Mooney 10668 X-ray, clear to Raleigh Executive Airport via the Knights 2 departure. Radars vectors to Sierra Delta Zulu, then is filed. Climb maintain 4,000, expect 5,000, 10 minutes after departure. Departure frequency on 126.15, squawk 6351.
All right, Mooney 1068 X-ray is cleared to Tango Tango Alpha via the Knights 2 departure. Radar vectors to the Sandhills VOR, Sierra Delta Zulu, then as filed. Climb to 4,000, expect 5,000 in 10. 126.15 for departure and 6351 for the transponder code.
Mooney 68 X-ray, readback correct. Ground frequency, expect runway 36 right for departure. Ground frequency is 121.9.
68 X-ray, thank you very much. Okay, guys, so there you go. I don't know if anybody has a comment on how that sounded. It sounded pretty real world to me.
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
No, yeah, that guy is a newer guy. He's a S1, and I don't know. I'm kind of doing two things, but I don't know if you talked about like the ATC rating system in VATSIM, but this guy is essentially the lowest level. He's an S1, so he got his certification I think 2 days ago. So there a lot of these guys at Charlotte especially are newer, and obviously we asked you to be patient with us, I think, as you already said, but we try our best to be as real world as possible. And once you get to the tower level, it gets significantly better. Those guys are trained a lot more. But yeah. I think you guys understand that.
Oh, absolutely. And it wasn't bad, Shane. My only point in mentioning it at all was that it isn't typical to have someone who's so clearly new. This guy was obviously a little bit more nervous than usual, but I'm sure a number of us pilots are going to feel just as awkward and nervous the first time we're on the network as well. So it's all good. At the end of the day, he provided a standard routing clearance, just
with
like
a SID. With a SID.
Yeah. So perfect. And it's nice, you know, as an example, they query first to make sure you can accept the SID. So as Heinz was saying, the more we try to do this like the real world, the better. Okay, I'm going to disconnect off the network at this point.
Did you need to tell them anything because you're not flying that?
No.
I don't think so.
Okay,
I'm
all right.
treating it like the real world
Okay.
where I could receive a clearance
Got it.
without taking it. But what do you say, Shane?
Oh
should
yeah,
it?
yeah, no, you're good.
Yeah, okay. All right, let me get back to our presentation. I think we were on to this one next. So another interesting possibility that you can get with VATSIM is the ability to share a cockpit with another virtual pilot flying at the same time in the same airplane. This can be accomplished through a software product called Smart Copilot. This is payware. It's about $20 a seat. So, you know, each guy's got to buy a license to do it. Basically what it does is it allows the two pilots to connect their flight sims together. I'll show you what the user interface for this looks like. So each pilot will have a connection ID. This changes each time you log into or you fire up your flight sim. But if I was to provide this connection ID to someone else on the internet with Smart Copilot, they could type that in on their side and then connect. And it would put him sitting in the same experience in his sim as I'm having in mine. When you do that, you have to be in the same aircraft type. It works best with a Cessna 172, as you can expect. It's a little hokey getting it configured, but not that terribly impossible to do. And what's interesting is it gives the pilots the role of pilot flying and pilot monitoring. So the pilot who is determined to be pilot flying, and you can change that on the fly once you're connected, but the pilot flying has full control over everything, the yoke, the throttles, all the switches. He's flying the airplane. The pilot monitoring can only do a few things, such as work the radios, he can raise and lower the flaps, he can adjust the altimeter, a few other minor things, but he cannot affect the yoke or the throttle mixture and props, these kind of things. What's interesting about that is it opens up the opportunity for an instructor, for instance, to sit over here in the right seat of an airplane being piloted by somebody else, both of you guys using your own private copy of X-Plane 11. And as the plane takes off or moves down the runway, the pilot monitoring, which would be the instructor pilot, is going to experience the flight exactly the way the student is, except you'll have your own independent viewpoints of everything that's going on and limited controls over what you can do to the airplane during the flight. It's a very interesting idea. I've done it a few times with some friends of mine, and personally, I find it extremely interesting to fly that way. One thing that's a little difficult, though, is the communications with the other pilot. So, and by the way, you can do this on VATSIM. I'll show you in a moment. There's a way to connect to VATSIM so that you don't cause any difficulties for them by having two virtual airplanes literally on top of each other. The difficult part is how do you talk to the other pilot in real time without keying the microphone. So you're both going to be hearing the radio comms from VATSIM, but you're not going to hear each other if you just speak. So to do that, you could use something like a telephone duo call or voice, you know, just a simple voice call on your phone. You could use a Zoom meeting and just do audio between you for the headsets. There's a couple ways you can handle it, but I just wanted to point that out as an interesting, possibly worthwhile training option for.
David, when the pilot monitoring, when we're on that side, can I pop up the instructor operating station screen from X-Plane and do an engine failure?
I don't believe so. I think what you're really sharing is just the position of the airplane in space. So as that changes, your view will, continuously update as the plane moves, but you're not actually controlling the remote flight simulator other than those few objects that this software connects across the board.
But,
and it's
but you
not the whole
can't, you
world.
can control it, right? You can transfer control to the other pilot, vice versa.
You can,
Yeah.
yes. So you could take control of the airplane, fail the engine, and then put it back in his hands, I suppose, if you want, and tell him he can't touch the throttle. Or you could just tell him to fail it, But yeah, I don't think it has that level of integration with the remote seat, so to speak. But
Philip, have you played
Yeah.
with this before?
I have no experience with Smart Copilot. I don't know if you can use it to fail an engine remotely.
Yeah. But anyway, it's an interesting piece of software. It might have some application. And if you want to do that while also receiving air traffic control services on VATSIM, you certainly can. You just simply connect, when you connect the second airplane, the pilot monitoring, he connects using the same call sign as the pilot flying with an additional character out here on the end. I think it has to, I think it's just a letter is fine. I don't know if it has to be a number, Philip, or I guess Philip doesn't know. Shane, the documentation tells you how to do it, but it's basically you're going to connect as the same airplane call sign with an extra digit, and you're going to use this option here, connect in shared cockpit mode. What shared cockpit mode does to VATSIM is it makes your airplane invisible while allowing you to experience and see everything that's going on the VATSIM network. Shane, did I get that pretty right as far as you know?
Yeah, it's weird. As long as you connect to the observer, it will be good on our end.
Okay. Of course, you don't have to do that on VATSIM. You can certainly fly around just the two of you on your X-Plane 11s and do it that way. I've done it both ways, and I haven't had any kickback of any sort from the VATSIM controllers. They don't seem to even know that the second airplane is there. In reality, the two X-planes appear to be flying on top of each other as you move around. The second one is just constantly moving to the position of the first one. Okay, so that's enough on cockpit sharing. Here's our next slide, and Heinz, I think we're back to you now.
I'll talk a little bit about the VATSIM organization. And I led off, it's worldwide, it's a big group of people, and they're organized with a board of governors at the top that provides policy and makes decisions for the group, and then subdivided in regions, divisions, and then centers underneath that. The divisions are pretty much aligned along countries. And Shane already mentioned that VAT USA has a website, vatusa.net, that includes communications for that organization and also has things like events that are occurring within the U.S. Underneath that are area control centers, or ARTICs. And I show a picture there of the real air route traffic control centers in the U.S. The VATSIM ARTICs are aligned pretty much along those lines as far as I can tell. And then the ones that are of interest to us, when we get down to the ARTICs, that's kind of the people who we deal with. And of particular interest to us are Washington Center. And Washington Center, of course, controls, as they do in the real world, they cover Tango Tango Alpha. And then Atlanta Center, and we've already alluded to the fact that Atlanta Center is very active, and we have an arrangement with Shane and his team that they will help us by scheduling some event-type services for us on a regular basis, which to me helps take some of the mystery out of when VATSIM services could be available. Now, those events are not exclusive for us, but at least they will have the controllers and staffing, and Shane and his team are very receptive in terms of what we want to see as long as it's within their area. Big group of people, lots of things happening as we saw on that global picture that David showed us. And of course, things happen people mess up, people are rude, people violate the rules, there are occasional conflicts. And there are ways to deal with that in the VATSIM organization and structure. Just from our standpoint, if you're out flying and somebody causes you a problem because they're not following the rules, there's an online supervisor. You can talk to the supervisor or contact the supervisor. The command that they use for that is called a wallop command. And the wallop command is not hit somebody over the head with a 2x4. It's a sysop-based term that allows you to send a message to the supervisor. And those kinds of things would be, you've got somebody that's that's in the airspace, in your way, and not talking, and doing other kinds of things that are interfering with good order and discipline in the network. I think from our standpoint, also, in addition to those measures, on that those center websites, you can leave feedback. So if you're not happy with a controller, you can leave feedback on the center and provide some constructive things about what you might like to see better. I think from our club standpoint, I don't think it would be much of a serve much of a purpose for us to complain about our volunteer controllers that are helping us out. And I think we should just be appreciative. But the mechanism is there, and we can take advantage of it if we choose to.
I just want to throw up there briefly that each of these centers has their own website, and they show their events there as well. Lots of ways to get in touch with these folks if you need to.
I've got a bullet at the end. VATSIM has a code of conduct that describes these rules and etiquette, and I certainly encourage and hope that all of our club members that are using these services will read that and be familiar with it, so we don't embarrass ourselves, at least unintentionally. And go to the next slide. And contained within that code of conduct, there's some things you shouldn't do on VATSIM. Some of these, like Dave alluded to, is a lot of these are just behave like you normally behave when we fly airplanes, and talk on the radio like you normally talk, and you'll be good. If the controller tells you to do something, do it, unless there's some safety reason you can't do it. And these are all things we're all very familiar with. Some things maybe not. Use of unimproved connection software. Dave talked about some things that are approved by the VATSIM organization. That's what you're supposed to use. Here's something that's not intuitive to me, I think, is pausing in midair, slewing the airplane, doing instant replays. Those are things that we do all the time on flight simulators. As a flight instructor, okay, stop, pause, talk, back up the airplane, replay that approach. Don't do that on VATSIM, because you've got a controller that's managing potentially a lot of these flights, and then all of a sudden you become a ghost that's blipping around, and it's really confusing. So that's a limitation. It's really not behavior that's that we can do on VATSIM and play by the rules. You shouldn't just leave your airplane connected to the network doing nothing. I think the rules suggest 30 minutes max of idle time, and even if you're out of the way, not hurting anybody, you're using network resources, and somebody's paying for that in some way. So don't waste it. And similarly, if you're connected to the network, don't walk away and leave your system unattended unless you're talking to a controller, and that controller knows that you're going to be away from a while. And that's similar to what we would do in the air if you have to leave frequency to check flight service, etc. Common sense for us, you can't use vulgar, offensive language. I don't think you would use vulgar, offensive language when you're talking to Raleigh approach. So same idea goes here. We talked about call signs. There are reserved call signs. I think if we just use our N numbers, we're good. Don't goof off. VATSIM has got some specialized things that they can do in terms of special operations organization and people doing military kinds of game playing and simulations. I don't think we're going to do any of that. And then last but not least, you're supposed to do what the controllers tell you to do, just like in the real world. On this the last one, the failure to contact in controlled airspace, don't connect to the network or don't fly into controlled airspace if there's an active controller without talking to that controller and establishing that communications. This can be kind of tricky because you can be flying along and the controller comes online, and you have to watch your client software, which will alert you that that controller is now available. And if they weren't there before and they pop up, you should be talking to them. So that's something a little different that we don't really have to deal with in the real world.
They do oftentimes help you with that part of it, Heinz. If you don't notice it, they'll reach out to you, usually with a text message of some sort, or sometimes on the same frequency that you're using, to ask you to check in with them. So they are very helpful in that aspect of it, but it is an unusual component of flying on this network.
Now, one thing I asked Shane to do, and I'll invite him to hop on the conversation now, is so from your perspective, Shane, what do as pilots, what do we do that make your life hard, and what can we do to help you?
Well, I mean, the big thing is this pausing and slewing. Like you said, it just is. It just disrupts the traffic flow and stuff like that. As far as other things that pilots do that grind our gears, it's not much. If you're as far as other things that pilots do that grind, hold on one second here. So I was transmitting a Discord with or TeamSpeak while I was saying all that. Okay, there's nothing. It's nothing really crazy. If you know what you're doing, if you're a good pilot, as long as you're not goofing off or anything like that, there's nothing that we're gonna be upset about. If you're too good of a pilot and you call us on procedures, maybe we'll be upset about that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a worthwhile point.
We'll try not to do too much of that.
Yeah, you probably won't have any of that from the folks at Wings of Carolina, but I do sometimes empathize with the treatment that I hear you guys receiving at times from guys on the network. So yeah, it's just common courtesy is all that we need, friends, and I'm sure that's what you're going to get from us.
So we can go to the next one now, I think.
Oh, this is me, sorry.
That's you.
Okay, so we just want to summarize basically the flow of getting yourself active on the VATSIM network. First step you're going to do is take a look at a map of some sort, probably VATtastic or something like that, to determine where controllers are at the time that you want to fly. Then you're going to fire up your flight sim software and put yourself on a ramp someplace away from a active movement area on a taxiway or runway. You don't want to be there. So get yourself on a ramp, parked without the airplane moving forward, and then connect yourself to the network using the client that you've configured for your flight sim. You do not have to file a flight plan, although oftentimes I found that if I didn't file one, and even though I want to go VFR as an example, depending on the airport, they will sometimes ask me to file one anyway. But I would just put out there, consider doing both VFR and IFR practice sessions on this network. It's actually quite interesting to try to remain VFR legal when it's a cloudy day and you're in a controlled environment such as the VATSIM network. So it's good practice for everything that we do. If there is a controller available, then you're going to pick up your clearance just like you would, whether that be an IFR clearance or a clearance to taxi or to depart. Just remember the top-down model. So you're going to go up to the first controller you can reach, who's either covering the position that you need or above that position, and that guy will give you all the services from his level downwards. If there is nobody online at the time, then just self-announce on 122.8 and go about your business as if it was an uncontrolled airport. While you're flying, you can observe ATC services on your client software. You'll see frequencies start to populate as guys come online. That gives you your first clue that there's controllers becoming available. I always tend to fly with a map on a second or third screen showing the VATSIM world, so I can kind of see myself, and I'll see how close I'm getting to some airspace with a controller. And just a few miles before you get into the next airspace, where if you're not already in contact, dial up that frequency, reach out to them, and then you do the same kind of thing you would if you were initially contacting a controller on the way out from Tango Tango Alpha. Everything about that's the same. And that's pretty much it. Enjoy the flying and the services that these guys provide. I think you, depending on how realistically you attempt to conduct yourself as the pilot, the experience on VATSIM can be extremely helpful in keeping proficiency and getting good practice in. That's all for me.
Let me talk on the link slide. I have a copy of this presentation that's on the Club Learning Center site, so you can click on these links and go to these websites. And we've talked to some of this about the code of conduct, etc. They have a good training program underneath this organization called VATSTAR. The initial ones basically cover in detail everything we talked about tonight. So I recommend you do that. It's not required, but you certainly will understand the system very well once you finish that. We already alluded to a couple of different clients for X-Plane on Windows. What I found out when club members started playing with this is X-Plane is great in that it's multi-platform, and a lot of these guys aren't on Windows. So we've got Linux guys, we've got Mac guys, and there are clients for all of that. So I provided some links to those different clients. And then David talked about VATtastic. That is an example of where to go to see which controllers are active and who's out flying around. One thing about the X-Plane install, or the X-Pilot install for the client, there is one aspect of that that's cumbersome, and it's managing and installing these CSL files, which are, there's a whole bunch of them. They're in archives, et cetera, et cetera. And I think if you're struggling with that, contact me or David, and we probably can just point you to something where you can get all that stuff in a nice package. But it's also not rocket science either. So if you figure that out on your own, it's great.
I have actually a question for that. If I have the X-Pilot client and I'm connecting to VATSIM and I have the Bluebell CSL files,
yes,
I found that I need the IVAO offset.
Yes.
Even though I'm on VATSIM, so
yes.
that everyone sits on the same
yes.
ground. Is that true?
Yes.
That is true.
Okay, why is it called IVAO offset if I need it on VATSIM?
It was developed for IVAO, but they use the same formats.
Okay. All right, so it's not me being stupid. It's
No.
really that way. Okay.
No, but
all right. Well,
the instructions for that, the instructions for that are, here's all these things, unarchive them, blah, 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 put it in this directory. And then, by the way, go to these IVAO offset files and replace some of the configuration files with the offset information. And all of that stuff, to me, is that aspect of it's not well documented. And that's,
but then you have to do it once and then never again. So unless you need to update it. I've got one other thing I want to say, and then we'll get into questions. And Shane and his team have volunteered to help us. I've selected kind of arbitrarily Monday nights as VATSIM night from 7 till I think 7 to 10, a 3-hour period, and I've provided some recommendations or requests to Shane on what we would like to do. So there's nothing that says that you have to do that, but then at least we know during those times on those days that we'll have a certain set of facilities staffed, so you can go out and you can go fly and have fun, or we can do like we did last Monday night and just do it as a group gaggle. Either way is fun, and there's nothing that says you have to do it one way or the other.
I don't know if you saw this, Heinz. I just want to throw out here. Here's the Atlanta Center website for VATSIM, and they've got us right here on their homepage.
All right, yeah, we're famous.
It's cool.
I also touched base with the Washington Center. Washington Center wasn't quite as enthusiastic as Shane's team, but they did say on Wednesday nights, they informally are staffed up from 7 to 10 on Wednesday nights. So Raleigh-Durham and Fayetteville and Tango Tango Alpha and all of our airports potentially would have coverage on Wednesday nights. So that's something you can kind of scribble down on your calendar as a good time to go out and play with VATSIM on our local airports. And
DC sucks. Don't fly with them. We're much better.
I agree with you. You're certainly a lot more helpful, and you're more active, and you're better organized, it would seem to me. But
well, I'll just throw out there that what's really fun is to do both. Like right now at this moment, we've got Raleigh covered, and we've got Washington Center, and we've got Atlanta Center, and we've got Charlotte approach. And so this would be a great time, for instance, to take a flight from Tango Tango Alpha outbound and head over into the Atlanta airspace someplace. And yeah, this is what I look for when I'm hoping to do some fun flying on VATSIM.
And so I think we have got a few minutes for questions. Are there any questions?
I'll say something real fast about something, if that's okay with you guys.
Sure, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so just real quick, something that we controllers like to call VATSIMisms. Essentially, anything that makes VATSIM completely not like the real world in some ways, and that's obviously like you guys were talking about is only having a center controller on and they work top down, and that can sometimes lead to some wacky stuff. You might be told if you're at a controlled airport to taxi to a said runway at your own discretion, which is kind of weird and obviously not extremely realistic, but because of the traffic loads that center controllers by themselves have to deal with, sometimes that has to happen. In addition, remember that it really sucks for pilots, because I fly too, and I hate it when right as I get on, the controller logs off.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And just note that if you look at VATTASIC, and you click on the controller, you should be able to see how much time they've been on. And most RTACs, including us, mandate that controllers have to be on for at least an hour. So if you catch a controller that just logged on, that you know that you're guaranteed essentially service for up to that hour. That's something just to keep note of, and that's just some weird VATSIM things that I thought I should mention.
And when you get on in that circumstance, if the controller's been on for an hour, Shane, is there some way you can message them and ask them how much longer they're going to be there?
Yes, for sure. You can PM the controller. Most controllers are nice about it, and they'll tell you. Although some guys, if they're working center top down, they might be too busy to. But for sure, I'll usually say I'll be on until this time. And some guys will put it in their remarks too, in their controller information. But just you can always PM them.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
Eastern 4-5, have clearance, advisory ready, copy.
Roger, Zacopa Eastern 4-5.
I was just going to show, if you click on the controller frequency here in the X-Pilot,
one last thing, unable cruise up to due to direction of flight.
Their little informational part.
350.
This is what you were calling earlier.
Yeah, we can do 350
controller ATIS.
Eastern 4-5.
Sometimes they'll put on there how long they're going to be online.
Ready, here's your clearance.
Let me get off that though. It's a little.
I have one question for Shane. Now that you mentioned that, Shane, David mentioned, when we see that ATIS is staffed, somebody is staffed to make that happen, and the ATIS at a particular facility is not always operating and not staffed. When you staff an ATIS, what do you actually do?
So you mean from like the controller end?
Yeah.
So it's this program that controllers use called VATIS. And you can Google it. It's a normal it's made by the same guy, Ross Carlson, that made all this wonderful X-Pilot and all this stuff. And essentially, it's just a program that actually I'll send a screenshot of it in a second here. And it allows there's like configuration profiles that controllers can put in that are designed by the higher ups at the RTACs, and they'll that's what it looks like exactly. So if you look at that GUI right there, it just has a you can select the letter, and then we just hit connect with our controller, information, and then it gives us all that handy dandy information and hooks up to VATSIM.
So you have to enter that and then submit it for the ATIS to be active.
So yeah, it's all pre-configured though. The METAR is pulled from the real world, so we don't have to type in anything. All we have to do is hit the connect button.
That's what I was thinking, in my experience, especially recent experience, the METAR information that you get in the VATSIM client reads line for line what you get on SkyVector at that moment in the real world. So I think they have it fairly well automated. The idea of a guide being assigned to ATIS, though, I had always envisioned that maybe that was your newbies or something that were just getting trained up and their first activity was to deliver ATIS in. I don't really know, but it seems odd to me that it's not always available, since the ATIS information is always out there someplace to be pulled in. But nonetheless, we can always get it in our side of it as well, so we know what weather we're flying.
Well, I think one aspect of it that you're not necessarily going to know from the real world is what runways you're using, because that might depend on the controller that's working at what they want to do.
Very true.
Yeah. What we do at the airports like Atlanta and Charlotte is we get the real world ATIS from online, and we use the ops that they're doing. At smaller fields, though, obviously, it's very difficult to find out what the real world's doing if you can't call the ATIS.
Right. All right, cool. Any other questions? Swami, are you all set?
Yeah, I think so. It looks very interesting and very useful information.
Okay.
I did have one question, though.
I know you did.
Yeah, so like in real world, like say if you want to fly to Asheville, and I think I remember the coverage chart. So it looks like RDU approach is active, but there's no approach controller for Asheville. So will that be treated as Class Echo, or is it still Class Charlie, and you get support from Washington Center?
That's exactly it, Swami. It's going to be treated like Class Charlie airspace, whatever the airport is. It's just that you'll receive services for that from the next guy up, however high you need to go to reach them. And currently, at least, that would be Washington Center.
So basically, if it's a covered airport, I could always expect some kind of service.
As long as you see Center online, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And it just gets better the more and more guys that get online, because then you get the frequency changing and, you know, the different voices to speak to and all of that, the different cadences. But yeah.
All right, sounds good.
Any other questions?
Heinz, George here.
Yes.
I'm late to the party in every possible way here, but just wanted to thank you guys. This is fascinating to me. It's a whole new world, and it's really exciting that you kind of bring this to our party. Really, really appreciate it. I'll have a million questions, but they're all questions you probably answered 45 minutes ago, so we'll take them offline.
Okay, sounds good.
Well, Heinz recorded it too, right? So he's going to...
It is recorded, so Dwight will not get upset with me.
No, it is, and I just sent an email out advising people that these are being recorded and the link to the YouTube site.
And last but not least, VATSIM Monday, 7 o'clock. We'll be at the GA ramp at Greensboro, and we'll take off. And,
expect speed restrictions.
Good job, guys.
That's right.
Thank you.
Y'all have
and
a
thanks
good
to
evening.
Shane, especially. I think thank you to Shane.
Thank you, Shane, very much for joining us tonight and all the help you're giving us.
No problem. Yeah, if you guys ever have questions, you can ec@z2rcheck.org or get them through Heinz, and I can help you guys out with anything.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Y'all have a good evening and stay safe.
Thanks.